This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today it's my pleasure to have two of my trainers from the legendary Hart family, both of whom have wrestled for Stampede Wrestling and WWE, Ross Hart and Bruce Hart. And Bruce is a former NWA International Tag Team Champion 2 times, former British Commonwealth mid-heavyweight champion 8 times, international tag team champion of Stampede Wrestling twice, once with Brian Pillman, once with Teddy Hart. He's also a former Stampede Wrestling North American heavyweight champion 2 times, world mid-heavyweight champion twice, and he was inducted into the 1995 Stampede Wrestling Hall of Fame. So he's a true legend. Great to have you two here. Thank you for joining me.
Great to see you, Devin.
Thanks, Devin. Appreciate you helping keeping the business going. You know, we need a lot more old school guys like you, and keep up the good work.
Appreciate it. And fans, as you're watching this, if any of you know how they could make their screen horizontal so they don't have to fight to be seen, just let me know. But one of the reasons you guys wanted to talk to me today, as I think you're upside down now, so you might just want to turn it one more time.
How's that now?
It's good, but it would be, for some reason, the screen won't widen, so I guess we'll just give up on it for now.
Okay, maybe we'll figure it out. All right.
Yeah, but one of the things you wanted to talk to me about today was superstar Billy Graham, who, of course, was a former world champion and WWE Hall of Famer. Recently overcame some heart issues at 78. He's still alive, unlike a lot of wrestlers. But he started in Stampede Wrestling with your father, and you wanted to tell the story of how he actually became Billy Graham and Dr. Jerry Graham's involvement in the whole situation.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because when he first came to my dad, I think it was in early 1970, he had some football background, and he was breaking into wrestling, and he wrestled as Wayne Coleman, which is his real name. Very few people know him by that name. Everybody kind of knows him as Superstar Billy Graham, but he had, as Bruce is going to tell you, a chance meeting with Jerry Graham, who happened to be in Calgary at the time, kind of on an unrelated matter, and Bruce can go into that. And the whole story was quite interesting, but how they had this chance meeting in the dressing room, and then Billy kind of, I think, or Wayne hooked up with Jerry Graham months later in California, and took the Graham moniker and became famous with it. In fact, he became more famous for the name Graham than Jerry Graham, the original Dr. Jerry Graham, and others like Eddie Graham and Luke Graham, who partnered Jerry Graham. But I'm going to let Bruce kind of tell the story about how they first met, because Bruce was right there and witnessed it.
I remember I was in the dressing room. I was just kind of a young punk then, but my dad brought Wayne Coleman into the dressing room and was introducing him to some of the guys. And I remember that old fart Dr. Jerry Graham was, he was on the periphery. He was having a lot of personal issues, primarily due to drinking, and he was fat and out of shape and all like that. But I remember Jerry staggered into the dressing room half drunk, and he had messed himself and was kind of, nobody was even wanting to be around him. And he kind of staggered up to Wayne Coleman. I think Jerry had messed himself, as I said before. And I remember he extended his hand, which was covered with excrement, to shake Wayne Coleman's hand, and he kind of muttered under his breath, somewhat challengingly, "My name is Balls." And Coleman, who was a big, strong guy, extended his hand and squeezed Jerry down and said, "My name is Dick. You got one." And that was how they first met. And I didn't discern that Coleman was overly impressed with Dr. Jerry at the time, but we were all somewhat intrigued a few months later when Coleman hooked up again with Jerry. I think it was down in Los Angeles or somewhere for maybe Mike LaBelle, and somehow there was compelled to change his name from Wayne Coleman to Billy Graham. And it was funny, they had three other crazy Luke Graham and Eddie Graham, none of whom are at all related to Dr. Jerry, but they all took his name too. So it was kind of intriguing. That was kind of the beginning of, and I think they later added the Superstar handle on it, and Coleman went on to become quite successful, first in AWA and then later on with Vince, where they had somebody dropped the world title to him, and he ended up becoming I think he was even the impetus for Hulk Hogan, from what I heard, that Hogan was a big fan of Superstar Billy Graham, and he kind of transcended and became a top level superstar, even though he was by no means the best worker out there, but he did have some charisma, and he was pretty good at cutting promos.
You mentioned about Jerry Graham being out of it and having facial matter all over him. Was that typical of him? Because I seem to recall hearing a story too. One day, Harley Race had to put him in a U-Haul trailer because he was so out of hand and he needed to get to the next town.
Yeah, Jerry had a pretty pronounced drinking problem, and he was he had a pretty good ego too, I guess. But he'd worked for us in the early '60s, and after he had been kind of sent packing by Vince Sr. or something, that's where he kind of got his big push in the '50s with Argentina Rocca and some of those guys. And I don't ever recall him being a great worker, frankly, but he had ability to cut not bad promos, and he seemed to have a bit of swagger to him, But
Yeah, Jerry was probably one of the lead heels of the early '60s in New York and Madison Square Garden, and he was a pretty intense heel. He caused a lot of riots. I think a lot of it was from his promos. I guess but I think before his drinking kind of got the better of him. He made some really good money and drew a lot of big gates. In
yeah, he got
New
really
York and Florida
fat too. He got put on. He was never well built, but later on he was probably close to 400 pounds and had kind of skinny legs and skinny arms, big belly, and was kind of a predecessor of maybe Adrian Adonis or something like that. That kind of a look to him. But
yeah, as he got heavier and his drinking got worse, then yeah, I think it was hard for him to perform in the ring, and then he wasn't controlling his bodily movements, you could say, and his behavior, because unfortunately more people remembered him being drunk, and he could be pretty aggressive, pretty confrontational when he was drinking, sometimes with promoters or wrestlers or fans. But there was an interesting background story too, though. When he came to Calgary, this was in early 1970, and Jerry just sort of showed up unannounced. He wasn't booked here to wrestle or anything. I think the last time he'd wrestled for my dad might have been around 1966 or 67, and he had worked a pretty good program against Dave Rule at that time. But he had a first wife here, and I believe
Maureen was her name.
Yeah, what was Jerry's first wife who lived in Calgary, Bruce?
Maureen Leggett.
Maureen Leggett. I don't know how many kids they had, if they had a couple, but I think they had one
He had
child
met her in
sure.
Calgary and then kind of eloped with her, and she was probably a teenager back in the early 60s or
Yeah, that would have been in the early 60s when Jerry first worked here for us, maybe with Luke Graham, but and you would have a better recollection of that, Bruce. But Jerry showed up here, though. I remember it was early January 1970. It was a bitterly cold morning. It was about 35 degrees, and he showed up at our house, at my dad's house, where the dungeon is, and it was about 5 in the morning, and we didn't have security or anything. He just sort of staggered into the house. I think he had taken a cab there, and he was
probably half pissed.
He was completely drunk and came into the house and was shouting up the stairs to my dad's mom's bedroom and said, "This is the good doctor, Jerry Graham, Stu," and hollered several times. It was almost like a dream or a nightmare. And again, nobody even knew that he had arrived in Calgary, but apparently he had come to see his kids from his first wife, who he had left behind in Calgary many years ago.
He wanted Stu to come and help him abduct his kids, and he was at odds with his estranged wife Maureen and wanted Stu to help. It's the good doctor. I want you to come and kidnap my kids or something like that. And my dad was somewhat amused, but more pissed off with old Jerry waking him up at 5 in the morning and half pissed and wanting to come on some kind of adventure like that. But
yeah, my dad, I think, was trying to advise Jerry not to do that, because it would probably involve the police, and it sounded like Jerry had a lot of issues, a lot of disagreements, I guess, with his first wife, and maybe he hadn't paid child support or anything. But
right around that same time, just maybe a bit earlier, Jerry's mother had died down in Arizona, and Jerry went to the I'm not sure if it was the hospital or whatever, and took her body without permission and slung it over his shoulder or something like that, and tried to walk out of the hospital. And I'm not sure if he was arrested or.
I think he was initially charged, and then they kind of dropped the charges because
he knew Senator Barry Goldwater or some. But there's a lot of sordid kind of elements to Dr. Jerry. Most of it's I never heard too many really glowing tributes to Dr. Jerry or anything. It's more like the stuff we're alluding to right now.
But he was trying to convince my dad to help him abduct his child, from Maureen, I guess. And my dad told Jerry he couldn't get involved with that, and advised Jerry to cool off and use a more rational approach. But I guess my dad gave him a coffee, and they talked for a little while. And this was still early that Friday morning. And Jerry then, I guess, took a cab and left and went over to his ex-wife's place. He must have still remembered where she lived or something, and showed up there and demanded to see their child. I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was a son or a daughter, but I guess she was living with her father at the time. And he came out with a broom and went after Jerry. And I guess he chased Jerry out of the yard with the broom and said, "Get out of here, you bum, you bastard." And they called the police, and I guess Jerry fled the scene before the police even arrived there. And so he wasn't successful in even seeing his child, but I guess he had shown up there and created quite a commotion. But
I think it was later that night he came down to the pavilion.
It was about
inebriated and having soiled himself, and that's when he met Billy Graham or Wayne Coleman, and
it was that same day.
My name is Balls and all like that.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the the initial meeting between Dr. Jerry and Wayne Coleman, alias Billy Graham.
And it was interesting. There was a lot of very high-profile wrestlers at the time, some who might have met Jerry before in some other territories, but certainly everybody knew him. He was a legend. He was infamous. He was well known. He'd been in the media and the news a lot. A lot of wrestlers had heard about his antics and behavior in other promotions and territories.
Yeah,
But
he's one of
when,
the cutting edge heels in the 50s. You know, he was one of those first heels that could really cut pretty hardcore promos and had a lot of kind of swagger and bullshit about him, you know.
yeah, but certainly you would have made an impression when he showed up in the dressing room that night. But and it seemed a typical appearance for Jerry. You know, that he would show up and his pants would be soiled and stained, and you'd be completely hammered and quite belligerent, maybe. But
Yeah, swearing and blustering and threatening and.
At the time, we had some very interesting wrestlers there. You know, not too many are around now, but just to give you an idea of what wrestlers he would have met or interacted with, like Abdullah the Butcher was there, Angelo Mosca, who was kind of taking Billy Graham under his wing because they both played in the CFL as football
Hamilton
players.
And Calgary.
Danny Lynch was here, Billy Robinson.
Hans Stryger.
Yeah, Hans Stryger, you know, Dave Rule, who he had worked with a few years ago. But Jerry certainly...
Crawford was just breaking in.
Dan Crawford was here at the time, just kind of breaking in. So I think a lot of them would have remembered Jerry coming into the dressing room. And I guess everywhere he sat, because he sat in different chairs, he couldn't stand up for long. There was a pool of excrement that he left, in every foam. Chair where he sat. So,
so why did you guys keep using him? I know it was your father, but was it just he was that good of a heel that you were able to overlook that kind of stuff? Or was he amusing enough to you that Stu just kept him around because he found those antics kind of funny?
I think my dad, as Bruce would say, was a pretty forgiving type, and sometimes he could work with guys like Jerry Graham, and
my dad
brought some money with him. But
my dad was always, very kind of accommodating to these. There was a lot of them that would come back, different issues and stuff. But my dad was kind of like an old father figure to almost all of them. That was one of my dad's redeeming traits. They seemed to all almost considered him to be sort of almost like a surrogate father. And so my dad was always kind of intrigued, sometimes amused, and he wasn't too judgmental. My dad, he seemed to almost harbor for years a bunch of these kind of, and that was part of the wrestling business too, as a lot of these guys were, kind of so-called bad actors or eccentrics or, outrageous characters or degenerates or criminals or whatever. That seemed to be part of the deal. So my dad seemed to almost derive some kind of enjoyment from seeing these guys and endeavoring to interact with them.
Sounds like it would have made a great reality show had those existed back then. But for Billy Graham, when he was doing those arm wrestling challenges with fans in the early Stampede wrestling days, because I understand your dad had him doing that as he was training and learning the ropes, was there ever any time where there was some concern that a fan might actually beat him?
Devin was asking, was there ever any problems with Wayne doing the wrist twisting, the arm wrestling, and maybe whether he might not be able to beat any fans or not?
I think he had some. It was kind of that was kind of a way to get him introduced, because he was just learning down in the dungeon how to work. But initially, they had him doing these so-called wrist twisting or arm wrestling things, and from what my dad told me, he was, in most cases, he was way too strong anyway. I don't think too many guys would have beat him, but a couple of times there were some of these, wrist twisters that were pretty decent. And Coleman would always just almost before they locked up, he would slam the guy's hand down before the guy even knew it was on, and then that kind of thing. And I remember one time there was some, I can't remember what his name was. He was like one of the local wrist twisting champions, and there was some concern that he might give Billy Graham or Wayne Coleman a bit of a run for his money, and Coleman did that same thing. Just as they're locking up, he slammed the guy's hand down and then kicked the table over.
And said, "Get this guy out of here.
Yeah,
He's cheating, or he's
something like that.
Yeah.
It was all part of, he was, kind of playing a heel role anyway. So it kind of,
And those were shoot situations, Devin. These fans or marks or whoever they were, they weren't part of the storyline or anything. They would basically show up, come into the ring, would be right in front of the live audience, and they would put up $100. And the idea was that if they could last more than 10 seconds, they would get $100 for every second that they could go with Billy after 10 seconds if he couldn't put their arms down. And Billy had, about 22-inch arms. He was heavily weightlifting, and I think he had done a lot of this in California. But there were there was some concerns about some of these big oil workers and lumberjacks and a few other guys that had done some arm wrestling. And as Bruce mentioned, in this one case, this one guy, there was some concern he might outlast Billy. Billy kind of just
before he even locked up, he slammed
his arm down before they even really got locked together, and kicked the table over and
kind of lifted his leg and pissed on him.
Yeah, and the guy was embarrassed basically, and he never even had a chance to even get set up. But Billy was an interesting character when he was here. He left behind some of his business in California. I think Bruce, you had one story about when Billy was purchasing a boxer or a dog or something, and
there was some charade that he bought an expensive show dog. I wasn't sure if it was a boxer or whatever, but he supposedly paid $1,000 for it and gave the guy a check, and then he returned it later the same day and said unfortunately his wife was allergic to it or some such thing, and apologized profusely, and the guy gave him $1,000 cash back, and then later on his check bounced, and Billy, I think, had left the territory by the time it was all transacted. But I remember when Billy left Calgary, supposedly to show his gratitude to my dad for breaking him in and all like that. He gave my dad a big color TV or something like that, and color TVs were pretty rare and expensive back then. And my dad said thanks or whatever, and then my dad noticed that it said like, Beaumont Motel or something. There's a little plate on the bottom of it. So I think he had stolen it from the motel that he was staying at or whatever. Anyways, so my dad was almost kind of more intrigued and whatever by that than he was offended or whatever. But
I think when Billy was up here, he drove, I don't know if it was a Lincoln Continental or something, but he drove it up from California, and he would kind of show it off to the wrestlers. And I think he was taking it on a lot of the road trips, and he didn't want to ride in the regular cars or vans, I guess, that they had for wrestlers. But it was about 6 months after he had been wrestling for Stu here, and his car suddenly went missing. It just disappeared, and I guess he had taken it from California and wasn't making the payments on it. And I don't think they figured they would trace him all the way to Calgary here, but they did.
He was quite upset.
Yeah, he was devastated, and his car was repossessed. But it was interesting back then. It was very odd that a sheriff from California or some state would come all the way out of country to a far place like Calgary and then repossess a vehicle. But they did, and Jerry was heartbroken after that. He had no vehicle, and Abdullah and quite a few others kind of chuckled about that. But But in some cases, you can't run away from the law, I guess. But he certainly did well enough here, I guess. In 6 months, he developed a character and pretty good speaking skills on the mic. And when he left here, he went to California and then hooked up with Jerry Graham there. And Jerry took him under his wing and then kind of made him the new addition to the Graham family. And they had a pretty decent run there for several months as a tag team, I think, before Jerry got fired. And then Billy
ended up
kind of
going to Minneapolis.
Yeah, Billy kept the name and became more successful with the Graham name than Jerry or Luke or any of them.
Somewhere in there, he acquired the name Superstar.
Yeah.
Soup, as everyone called him.
Yeah.
There's a fan on here that wanted to know, was it actually Stu himself that trained Billy in Calgary? And also, did he pick up the talk right away, or is that something that came later?
Stu had him down in the dungeon quite a few times, and I think he had some kind of journeyman underneath guys taking bumps and, teaching them how to do the basic stuff. And I don't think he ever became what you'd say a great worker, but he had enough charisma and the appearance, obviously, and all like that. So it kind of was enough to get him over. And I think where his career really took off was in Minneapolis, where AWA was pretty high level territory. And he went in there and they put the strap on him, and they had some of the best workers in the business there that were, putting him over and making him look good. And
he had some really good programs. I think with Ken Patera, who was breaking in, and Ken had just finished in the Olympics, I guess, and weightlifting and powerlifting, and was a baby face, but he was kind of a counterpart to
He had some
Billy.
Good guys like Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens,
and Billy teamed with Ivan Koloff and did
Red
well
Bastien
there.
And all of that were pretty good at kind of giving him some kind of guidance. And he became a huge star. I was told later on that Hulk Hogan patterned himself after Billy Graham, Superstar. That was his idol and the guy he was wanting to be like. And so he had a lot of success. And I think he was smart enough to not try to do stuff he wasn't capable of. I don't think anyone ever saw him do a drop kick or climb the top ropes or do a sunset flip or anything like that. It was all mostly strongman stuff. And I don't think he did too much actual wrestling, but it didn't matter. Got him over, and that's why we're talking about him today.
Yeah, the strongman style he had got him over very well. And when we went to New York, Bruno Sammartino very willingly agreed to drop the title to him. I think it was Bruno's second reign, and he wanted to retire, I guess, or semi-retire. I think Bruno had been on the road for some time, and he had some injuries too. I think he had gotten his neck broken in a match with Stan Hansen where he got body slammed. But I think Bruno actually handpicked Billy to succeed him as the new champion, and he was maybe a transitional champion. I think the idea was for Bob Backlund to win the title, so they needed a heel in between Bruno and Bob Backlund to hold the title. But Jerry got over very well. He drew some huge gates in New York and Madison Square Garden. I think it was maybe one of the longer reigning heel champions they had in WWF, because they always had a babyface champion. Usually the heels who had it wouldn't hold the title for long. But
Bruno and Pedro and Bob Backlund and Hulk and all that.
Bruno had it. I think Billy had it for maybe 6-7 months and got over so well. And I think they had some second thoughts about whether they should have had him drop the title to Backlund and let him keep it longer, or maybe turn Billy babyface. But they kind of went ahead with their plan, and Billy was professional and put Backlund over. That was what was planned all along. But he certainly did very well in New York and AWA and a lot of territories with the strongman heel style. But
a lot of guys trying to copy him that were kind of, including Hogan, and we had a guy up in Calgary named Steve Strong who was a big buddy of Billy Graham, and there was quite a few other of those prototype muscle men, Austin Idols, and even Big John Studd, and some of them that emulated Billy Graham and tried to be like him.
yeah, I think he definitely inspired and influenced a lot of these big heels, these guys
Even maybe
in the
Hawk and
steroid
Animal.
era, and Jerry, I think you'd be the first to admit he probably introduced the steroid era in wrestling, but he did it very well and made a lot of money with it, and it was a big drawing card in so many promotions, so
Soup.
yeah, absolutely. But it's
one of the other guys that actually had a lot of influence on Superstar was Abdullah. Abdullah was our top heel at that time, and he kind of befriended Billy Wayne Coleman right at the outset, and gave him a lot of kind of good advice on being a heel and getting heat and all like that. So I don't know whether they remained friends or not, but they initially were quite close, and Abby was kind of one of the main people giving Billy advice and kind of helping to guide him.
He did tell a story about Abdullah in his book that I don't know if you were around for this show or not, Bruce, but he said that Abdullah had taped a razor blade to a popsicle stick and he was wrestling a star in the main event, but he started off the night wrestling this native indigenous wrestler and just like went to town on him with a popsicle stick. Do you recall that at all?
I recall a few kind of stories with Abby and blades and some of that kind of stuff. I remember I heard some story, oddly enough, involving Abby and Angelo Mosca. Angelo was initially a face for us before he became a heel later on, but I think Angelo was supposed to get juice for Abby or something, and he was apparently, not thrilled with it, or was kind of bitching about it. And I heard Abby had the harpoons taped to his fingers, and he backed out Angie up into the ropes and kind of gently or otherwise kind of stuck the blade in the side of Angelo's neck, like his jugular or whatever, just to, indicate, get down to business and do it, Angie, or whatever. And I heard Angelo was quite threatened or terrified or whatever.
Yeah, he actually left the territory, and he was supposed to work with Abdul, and my dad had to kind of we had to get them together and reconcile. And Angelo came back a week or two later and finished his program with Abdul. But I think there's also some issue there with one of the female fans that they were both vying for at the time, and maybe it was some competition there between them, and Angelo thought Abby was moving in on one of his girls out of town or something in Regina or someplace like that. And anyway, so there's definitely some heat between them as well. And then, as it turned out, they were supposed to do a program against each other. But I think Wayne was kind of caught in the middle because he was Angelo's tag partner, but he was very close to Abby as well. So I think he was kind of in a dilemma there because he didn't know whose side to take. But there's definitely some heat there between Angelo and Abdullah, and Abdullah was quick to use his instruments if he felt he needed to.
I have to ask you guys about WWE's lack of use of your nephew Harry, who you both helped train, and of course, he was in Stampede Wrestling for years and years. But it seems like he's been under contract since April, and all they've done with him is put him in one online interview. What do you feel about how Harry's being used right now by WWE?
I couldn't really formulate a opinion yet. Um, all I can say is Harry's really talented, great athlete, and a bit like his dad. He's not all that well versed in cutting promos, or his strong suit is what he does in the ring. But if they use him the right way, I could see him getting over quite well. He's got a lot of talent, and he's a nice kid, as you know, Devin. He's pretty.
Yeah, we're kind of taking a wait and see approach there, Devin. Like I know they re-signed him recently, and he was supposed to be on the SmackDown roster, and yet he hasn't been featured. I think he had one dark match or something, although I haven't seen the SmackDown show in a few weeks, so we're kind of wondering just what they're planning for him, and I think he'd be a great asset to them. He's really improved his look. Like, he looks tremendous. He's been working out hard. He's been training with the MMA and the shoot style wrestling. Even during the whole COVID period, he was working out fanatically in the gym and training, and I think he's in the best shape of his career. So I'm not sure what WWE's plan for him is. I know he's going to be a big asset to them. I think
he's a lot like his dad. His dad had, was a great athlete and talent. And he was fairly quiet, and he wasn't all that into cutting promos and stuff. But initially, they had Dynamite Davey with Jimmy Hart and some of that.
Lou Albano.
Yeah. Lou Albano, and they became pretty good stars. And I think WWE, a bit like Backlund too, was not really a dynamic talker, but he got over and was capable of doing the job in the ring. And if they need, they could have somebody be a mouthpiece for Harry if they need to have something like that.
We're kind of just taking a wait and see approach there, though, Devin, because Harry will be a great asset to them, especially in the UK and Europe, where they have a pretty strong following. But hopefully they don't leave him on the sidelines too long. He's sort of at the prime of his career right now, and I could see him having great matches with a lot of guys on the SmackDown or Raw roster. So hopefully they start showcasing Harry soon. I thought it would start happening maybe after SummerSlam, when they start their new programs and introduce new guys. So hopefully they're just figuring out who they're going to put him against, and get him over well this time, because he was kind of wasted years ago when he and Tyson Kidd were tag champions, and they didn't really have the right guys for them to work with when they won once they won the tag team belts, and he was really underused, and they didn't get a lot of mileage out of him, and they should have been able to. So hopefully the WWE capitalizes on him, because I think he can be a great asset to them and make a lot of money for them and himself.
I think this question might have been more meant for Bruce, because I know Bruce worked with the evil Doink. Oh, Bruce is back now. There was a fan on here, Bruce, that wanted to know your memories of working with Matt Bourne. I know you did a little something with him in WWE at SummerSlam. And what were your thoughts on his passing? He died real young.
I had met Matt in one of my earlier trips to Portland when I was doing some stuff with Martel and Piper and Rip Oliver. And he was a really good worker, Matt. To some degree, his image is somewhat clouded because of the Doink the Clown thing. It was almost kind of more of a parody of what he was, but he was a really good amateur wrestler, I heard. And I did some work with him over in Europe as well, and he was a good guy, Matt. I had nothing but high regard for him and respect, and he had a few issues, I guess, that kind of unfortunately proved to be his, kind of brought him down, or but I had nothing but good things to say about him. It's too bad his outcome was unfortunate.
I think, like a lot of the wrestlers, he had some trouble with different substances, and there was no doubt he had a lot of talent. He got over in a lot of different roles, as Doink the Clown or as Matt Bourne, but no question that he had some ability in the ring. He was a great character wrestler.
Bruce, what do you think about all the leg slapping in wrestling that we see today? Because I don't recall you ever teaching me that when I was in the dungeon.
What is that?
Leg slap. Yeah, I think
leg slapping.
guys,
It's so prevalent in wrestling today.
Oh, yeah, I think it's bullshit, frankly. I never saw any of the really great work. I never saw Harley Race or Dory Funk or, Billy Robinson, guys like that. They would sneer at stuff like that. And I think more than anything, it's an insult to the fans that, because it's pretty easy to pick up on, and they're not all that impressed, If anything, they're kind of going, we're not that stupid, some guy slapping his ass or his leg and making out like it was a kick in the back of the head or something like that. So,
yeah, it's really a very artificial sound effect that's pretty easy to see through. Fans can watch it, so I don't know why anyone would rely on that to try and get over, because it's really more of a distraction from the move you're trying to do, whether it's a knee lift or an elbow smash or a clothesline. In a real struggle, you wouldn't slap your leg or your hip, to do something like that. So something like that should be more disguised. It should be more subtle, and some of these guys go overboard, to try and make it obvious, and it's really going against what they're trying to show the audience. So
it's more of an insult to the people's intelligence that they think that they're that stupid that they're going to be, in awe of some artificial bullshit like that. But
Tom Burke wants to know, how was your experience wrestling in England?
It was incredible. As I mentioned in my book, I ironically went over there because my dad had kind of cut some kind of a deal with these two guys from Edmonton to sell the territory, the Osborne brothers. And I had gotten out of university and, was given to believe I would have a job in January that year. So I figured I'd go over to England, and I'd spoken to that old fart John Foley, who was kind of working for my dad at the time, and he hooked me up with promoters over there, a guy named Max Crabtree and another guy up in Leeds named George Valwisco Jr. And I went over there more just to do some sightseeing, and I was mostly wrestling to pay my bills. So I wasn't really expecting much out of it. And they gave me a far better push than I anticipated I'd get over there. And they were having me work with some of their best guys. But I was at one of the shows in some little town in England called Chester, and this old fart came up to me. He reminded me of the guy Mick or Burgess Meredith character in the Rocky movies. And his name was Ted Betley. And he came up to me and he was quite gracious and all. And he told me he had known Billy Robinson and Jeff Ports and Les Thornton and some of those guys. And then he says to me, I've got a lad here who's better than any of them, and which is saying quite a bit because Robinson and those guys were among the best workers ever in the business. And he brought this skinny kid over, and the kid weighed about 140 pounds and skinny and zit faced, and he was pretty quiet and didn't. I wasn't sure if he was shy or kind of arrogant, but he said, "This lad's gonna be better than any of them." And he introduced him as just Thomas. So I shook his hand, and he told me that he was working later that night on the card with some guy named Steve Gray or something like that. And so I told him I'd watch his match, and I'd had a lot of guys, trying to get booked in Canada at the time. They had all heard about Billy Robinson, Jeff Ports, and Thornton, and all like that. So they thought Calgary was like the promised land or something. And anyway, I went and watched this Thomas, and I think I told somebody it was about like maybe the first time Berry Gordy saw Michael Jackson, he's kind of like, whoa, Dynamite was that good, they just, had a certain flair about him, and everything he did was really dynamic. And I was going, wow, this guy's, and even though he only weighed 135 or 140 pounds and heavy weights were all my dad was using, I had no doubts that he had exceptional potential. And I came back from England, and much to my mother's chagrin, the deal that my dad had cut to sell the territory to these two guys from Edmonton, the Osborne brothers, had fallen through. And my mother was adamant that my dad just get out of the business, and she was tired of it all. And my dad was almost kind of, as if he had had a reprieve, and he was bound and determined to go back and, revive the promotion. So I started trying to sell my dad on bringing Dynamite in, and even though we had, our talent was pretty threadbare, we didn't have too many guys that were worth a damn in the territory. My dad was still old school enough that he had no, belief that a 140-pound skinny kid was going to have any effect on anything. But things kept getting worse, and I finally persisted, and my dad ended up bringing Dynamite in, and he was everything that I said he was going to be. He immediately, at that time, I think Brett hadn't even started yet, and there was just kind of a marginal group. And Dynamite initially was a face. He went out and worked with a few of these old heels like Norman Frederick Charles and
John Foley. Yeah.
John Foley, who was an old underneath jobber, and there was a few others. I can't remember. A guy named Terry Sawyer may have been around just after that, and
Cuban Assassin, a few others.
Perone Brothers, and some of these. And Dynamite was like as I said before, he's like Michael Jackson or something. All of a sudden, kind of ignited. And we at that time had never ever had a junior heavyweight division or anything in the territory, and all of a sudden we created this thing called the mid-heavyweight title, the British Commonwealth mid-heavyweight title, and that became a big ticket thing in the promotion. And Dynamite was kind of the impetus for Brett getting into the business. And later on, a year or so later, I brought his cousin in. He was initially called Young David. It was Davy Boy, but there was some boxer kicking around in England. I think he boxed Sugar Ray Leonard right around that time, named Davy Boy Green. And so I changed his name to Davy Boy Smith, and he became a big attraction in himself. He feuded initially with Dynamite, and then later on they became the Bulldogs. They tagged a few years later, but initially they were always supposedly arch rivals, Dynamite and Davy, and they had a lot to do with the promotion taking off, and all these other guys that kind of became fairly well known kind of rode on that momentum, including Brett and some of the other guys, Jake and Junkyard, kind of rode on that wave a bit, and Benoit later, who idolized Dynamite, and Owen and Pillman and Jushin Liger and quite a few others. So that proved to be kind of a huge turning point in the evolution of Stampede Wrestling.
Yeah.
Bruce, there's a guy on here named Mike that wants to know, what was it like in the locker room with Andre the Giant and Giant Gonzalez? I know you ran into both in your career, but more familiar with Andre.
I remember one of the more intriguing things. My dad he used to bring Andre up every year for the Stampede Week, which was kind of like our version of WrestleMania, our big show every year. And my dad would have the girls and the midgets and Andre and Dory Funk or Harley or whoever the world champion was. But I remember this one year, my dad, he had Andre, and he booked these two twins called the McGuire twins. They were both about 800 pounds each.
Yeah.
And
Had the Guinness Book of Record of being the world's largest twins, and they were wrestlers.
And Andre, I remember he quite adamantly told my dad in the dressing room right in front of them and said, I'm a wrestler. They're freaks. They're not. I'm not a freak or something like that. And he went. We're supposed to be having a battle royal. That was always what the big thing was with Andre. You'd have him in a battle royal, and they'd have 20 guys in there, and Andre would usually emerge victorious. And but I remember the McGuire twins were in the battle royal, and it was laughable in itself because they were too obese and whatever, and to even be put over the top rope, they probably would have killed themselves if they had gone over the top rope. But they were thrown out and went underneath the bottom rope or some bullshit. But I remember they were so physically challenged, they had to be. It was maybe
they couldn't walk from the dressing room to the ring. They had to.
We had to get a forklift literally
to carry them because they
one at a time. And,
because they were so out of breath. They had no cardio or stamina, and they couldn't make the walk from the dressing room to the ring, which would have been maybe 100 yards or so. And then, as Bruce said, we had to use a forklift to tow them to the ring. Just
Andre wouldn't even touch them in the ring. He considered it beneath his dignity to even interact with them, and I think they were well aware that Andre didn't have any respect for them either. But it was kind of I remember being in a few of those battle royals that year, and it was kind of weird with the McGuire twins and Andre, and there's a few other oddballs in that ring too. But it was kind of weird being part of that whole thing, and it was to some degree like a freak show, you know. But
Yeah, I think Andre was very self-conscious and standoffish with other large wrestlers. And he didn't like to be considered a freak or on the same level as
McGuire's
the McGuire twins, maybe, or Haystacks Calhoun or others. No disrespect to any of those guys, but Andre didn't like to be even in matches with them, tag matches or battle royals. He considered himself a real unique athlete, which he was, and he really distanced himself from working against guys like that.
Yeah,
I know
he hated being perceived just to be a freak, you know, and he considered a lot of the others to be freaks and himself not, or whatever.
Giant Gonzalez, Devin, I honestly don't know much about. I never saw him. I know he wrestled in WCW and WWF.
They were never in the same era where they
no.
Andre had already maybe died before. I can't remember if he had, but I don't recall him ever being in the same ring or in the same territory at the same time.
He wasn't on any shows that you were in the WWF at that time, Bruce? I think he came a few years maybe.
I maybe was down there for a few shows, and he was a lot different in my estimation than Andre. He was, you know, more of a sort of a sideshow attraction or whatever, rather than being a serious wrestler type thing, you know.
I think he had some notoriety as a basketball player. I believe he was from Argentina, but he never really made the transition to professional wrestling very well. He didn't seem to get over in WCW or WWE.
When they had the biggest show apparently ever in WWE history, attendance-wise, in WrestleMania 3 in Silverdome, Andre and Hogan were the big main event, and Andre was good enough worker that people took it seriously enough that they seriously thought that Andre might become the world champion. But that was a tribute, I guess, to the fact that Andre was, you know, actually not a bad worker. He, you know, as opposed to just being kind of a sideshow attraction or whatever.
No, and to Andre's credit, he put Hulk over. He kind of passed the torch to him, you know, and Andre never really needed a world title to get over, but you know, the storyline and angle for him to fight Hulk was very well done, and I think a lot of people thought he might win the title and end the reign of Hulkamania. But
that was one of the things that really launched the WWE, you know, made it what it was at that time. That WrestleMania 3 really was kind of a turning point.
Agreed.
I have to ask, because it's been in the news, what are your thoughts on the whole controversy with Ric Flair being called out for this plane ride from hell stuff recently, and all that hoopla over the past week after the Dark Side of the Ring episode?
What exactly happened there? Was there some kind of quasi-scandal or?
Yeah, what happened was, I guess 20 years ago, Ric Flair, Dustin Runnels, and Scott Hall were getting grabby with some flight attendants, and Ric Flair apparently took his robe off and did his naked dance that he does, that I guess he calls the helicopter.
This was on a air flight?
Was it a private flight, I think?
Yeah, it was a private flight, and now that the stories can't come out, Ric Flair has lost an advertising campaign, and there's been a big deal made about it over the past week.
Yeah, Devin?
Can't hear.
Yeah, you couldn't hear that? He lost an advertising campaign over this, even though it happened 20 years ago, and apparently it was settled out of court.
What's the ostensible issue attached to it? Like they're upset at Rick for what he did back then, or is there? I'm not sure.
I guess just with all the speaking out and all the Me Too movement these days, um, they think that he should be punished further. I guess the people that are against him.
Yeah, I guess you can be held accountable for your actions, even if it was 20 or 30 years ago.
If there was no adverse consequences, like the plane didn't crash there, nobody got sexually assaulted, or there was, I don't know what the, you know, if, if it was
She's
just kind of Rick.
claiming that he made her grab his dick,
Oh,
but there was no criminal charges pressed, and the civil suit was allegedly settled.
I don't think it reflected well on Rick, but, and I certainly don't advocate or endorse any kind of stuff like that. Even if you're inebriated, you need to, behave accordingly. But I don't know. It doesn't reflect well on Rick, but it says something about her too. That 20 years after the fact, begs the question: if was that egregious or whatever, she should have gone, to the authorities or whatever 20 years ago, and So I don't know what some of the other elements of it are, but it doesn't say much for Rick. But
it's unfortunate if it's going to be held against him now with endorsements and advertisements and sponsorships. And I guess it just shows that your past actions can definitely haunt you for sure. But
what's happening with Rick now anyway? Is he back in AEW, or has he been fired by Vince? Or I don't know what the
people are suspecting that Vince may have known this was going to come out because he was released only about a month ago, and now they're saying this might affect him being used by AEW.
Wow.
Hopefully it'll come out all right for everybody. Rick's paid a lot of dues, paved the way for a lot of guys, and he's dedicated his heart and soul to the business. So
yeah, and
I'd like to
he's
see
overcome
him
a lot of health issues and turned his life around in a
yeah,
positive way, which I think he
even
deserves
back
a lot of
in
credit
he
for.
overcame the plane crash with, back in the 70s, and all like that. But yeah, I'd like to see Rick kind of given the benefit of the doubt. He's put his heart and soul into the business, and and a good guy too. If you're ever around him, I always found him to be a pretty decent. He was kind of an extension of that Harley and Dory and Terry Briscoe type. He had that certain mystique and whatever about him. So I have nothing but respect for Rick, and hopefully he'll emerge out of this, fairly well. It was his reputation still intact.
There's the other piece of news that came out in the past week is AEW is going to do an Owen Hart Cup. That's going to be a yearly cup event in AEW, and they've come to a deal with Martha to put Owen in a video game for AEW and release merchandise. What are your thoughts on this?
Is this apparently with the consent and endorsement of his widow, Martha?
Yeah.
Yes.
I assume they must have gotten some, kind of agreement or approval from her. I don't know. First I've heard of it just now. So I applaud it if it's sincere, and it sounds like it is. And
I think
go
if
on
it,
record. They should contact Ross or myself, or as close to Owen as anyone, and both of us had a lot to do with launching Owen's career and being integral parts of his, rise. So I, I'd be more than happy to give him some suggestions and maybe endorsement if it enhanced the whole thing.
If it's something that positively celebrates Owen's image,
And it's not
I'm
just
all in favor of that.
exploitative, yeah.
I don't think Martha was ever going to reconcile with the WWE over Owen's death and their handling of the criminal investigation afterward. That was never ever going to happen, and he was never going to be inducted in their Hall of Fame.
So Owen certainly deserves to be remembered and honored accordingly. So
I think it could be a very positive thing if it's done well, and I don't know what access they would have to any of his film footage, which the WWE must own, but there's other footage of Owen that's definitely out there from Stampede and from Japan and other promotions where he worked. So and everybody remembers Owen so well. So I think it could be a positive thing if they do something for the Owen Hart Foundation as well, which is a great fundraising charity organization that Martha's established, and if it again celebrates his legacy and what he contributed to the wrestling industry, I think it's a great thing.
If you're talking to any of those guys, Devin, I don't know that you interact with AEW, but tell them that Ross and I would be more than happy to discuss that and lend ourselves to anything that enhances it. Tell them to give us a call and we can maybe give them some help on that whole thing and make it a success.
I'll be sure to pass the message along, and yeah, that's a good thing, and I think it could be good for your family too, with to have that AEW connection as well.
Oh yeah, and before Ross and I were probably the two most integrally associated with Owen when he was getting his career launched and during his whole run in Stampede.
Absolutely, Bruce. You were the biggest influence on Owen growing up. You not only introduced him to wrestling, but you groomed him in a lot of sports. You taught him how to throw a football or hit a baseball. You took him golfing.
I took Owen down to Hawaii with me and down to Amarillo, Texas.
You were his biggest role model and influence when he grew up. So
I had him down.
It's important that you're a part of that.
I had him down dungeon when Dynamite Kid was just kind of igniting the territory. I had him down there, and I later on hooked him up with Pillman and all those guys. He had a chance to meet some of those iconic old heels and learn a lot about charisma from David Schultz and the Toilet Bowl, Mike Shaw, Muckham Singh, and
Karachi Vice and
Gamma and Hiroshi Hosei, the Viet Cong Express, and all like that. So, I have. I'm delighted to hear that Tony Khan or whoever are doing that, and I'd be more than happy to help them in any way, and applaud them for their initiative, and I'd love to see it get over the way it should.
From what I understand, there's going to be an actual cup made like the Stanley Cup, and it's going to be called the Owen Cup.
Oh, that's good. I as I've said before, they need to do it, with dignity and sort of a respectful, non-exploitative way, and where they maximize the potential of it, and it serves the purpose of honoring Owen, but maybe inspiring a new generation and introducing fans to the style of wrestling that Owen was a proponent of.
Last question here, because I know you have to go. There's a fan that wants to know your opinion of the Steiner brothers.
Of one.
Rick and Scott Steiner. They were great amateur wrestlers. Rob and
Rick Steiner.
They came from Michigan. Two tough
that
guys.
was their names, Rex Steiner.
Yeah.
I met them a few times. They always seemed like good guys. They're kind of prototypical, as you can reflect to being a pretty decent amateur yourself, Devin. They were pretty legitimate amateur wrestlers and perceived to be legitimate tough guys. At the same time, I never really, that was always one of the prevailing downsides of a lot of the amateur wrestlers or shooters, what they were trying to shoot or kind of take advantage of guys in the ring. And I never heard anything about that relative to Scott and Rick. I met them the odd time on some of my sojourns down at WWE, and they always seemed like pretty good guys. I never discerned anything, and I never heard much bad said about them, although some guys apparently had issues with them, which seemed to impede their progress or whatever in WWE or whatever. But I'm not even sure what they're doing these days.
I don't know if Scott's wrestling anymore. I think Rick's long since retired.
Scott just wrestled Jerry Lawler last weekend in his first match since his heart attack.
Okay.
I hope he's, and anyone who's had a heart attack's obviously got to be careful, and I hope I'm sure he's well aware of that, and has been given a clean bill of health or whatever, and I don't even know how old he is. He's probably got to be in his 60s.
Well, they had a very good run in the WCW, and they were an explosive tag team. Scott kind of invented the Frankensteiner move, which you see a lot of guys doing. But as far as I remember, he kind of introduced that or launched that. But they were both incredible athletes, and two guys you didn't want to mess around with in the ring because they were both really good shooters, but also strong as bulls. They just had so much upper body strength. So you had to respect them and earn their respect in the ring. And that's why they were so successful, especially in Japan with the harder hitting style there. But I had a lot of respect for both of them. They're a tremendous tag team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks again for joining me.